Hello and welcome. Welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. We are glad that you could join us this afternoon. And this afternoon, we're going to be covering a topic which is very much in the present zeitgeist over the last 24 hours. A development which happened in a certain part of the world that we're sure you've heard of, you heard about by now. And this prompted today's topic, if for no other reason that the fallout from the events of the past 24 hours will surely have a profound relevance and resonance in the coming days and weeks and months and possibly even years and beyond. Before we dive in any meaningful, detailed way, we would like to just express how we may be using what amounts to code words or speaking a little bit in vague terms, or not using certain terminologies and certain names specifically, because we have to be cognizant of the fact that we recently received a strike on this channel on a video which we posted back in 2021. The powers that be at this platform decided that they would review some of our past live streams, and they found one they didn't like, and it apparently violated policies, which as a result, said video was removed, but this channel received a strike. And the way the system works on this platform is if you receive too many strikes, your channel can be suspended or outright removed. We, of course, would like to avoid such inevitabilities if we can. It is to a large degree out of our control. However, we are able to make clear what it is we are referring to without using certain buzzwords which will make their automated bots sound red flags and alarms, if you will. And while there aren't any particular policies that we are aware of that are entirely relevant to today's proceedings, that is not to say that such policies won't be enacted or won't be brought down in the future. And what's more is those policies may very well extend beyond merely the platform we are on. In recent days, the Parliament of Canada enacted legislation to greatly restrict or greatly increase the manner to which they monitor and manage content on various platforms from all over the world, in an apparent attempt or supposed attempt to protect the citizens of the Great White North from all sorts of supposed malicious content and disinformation and whatnot. Such legislation we may find on the rise in the coming years. And to the degree that it may become very difficult to speak about certain topics, we must be aware of that, cognizant of that fact. The information that we relay here on a weekly basis, its fundamental nature has not changed in thousands of years. And for a great deal of time, during that time, for a great large chunks of time throughout space, those proffering this information and sharing this information had to do so in secret, had to go underground because of the profane nature of humanity in general and its tendency to abuse the truth because knowledge is power, but also to fear that which they do not understand and to persecute those who do not fall into line and follow their rigid ideologies, belief systems, etc. We don't want to dwell on this too much, but given the specific identity of the major players involved in the certain conflict which has erupted in the world in the past 24 hours, we must recognize the state of the mainstream media and the fact that said institution is very much an institution of the state. No matter where you go in the world, they are state-run institutions. And we must be cognizant that we are indeed treading on thin ice as we delve into the topic at hand, even though our concern here is not to make any sort of political statement, is we're not here to side with any political interest. We are here to explore the esoteric significance of all conflict, of all confusion. And since we are in the Kali Yuga, these two phenomena, conflict and confusion, in essence, describe the very foundation of the very nature of the age that we are living in. Just try to get a straight answer out of Google or out of any online resource. You will get a myriad of opinions and theories and beliefs and of course, individuals and groups happy to sell you seminars and programs and workshops and retreats to indoctrinate you into their particular belief system, into their particular worldview, their particular my truth. Confusion is certainly what is swirling around what is bellowing out of like a cloud of smoke, bellowing out of the core nucleus of conflict, which is broken out in that part of the world, in the Middle East. And when we look to our own lives and when we look to conflict which arises between ourselves and those closest to us, very often we can also experience that cloud of confusion which bellows out of that conflict. If the conflict is the spark, the explosion, the incendiary reaction, confusion is that cloud of dust, of smoke, of collateral damage, which results from that incendiary spark. It is the aftermath. And as you are likely aware of from your own experience, that cloud lingers. The cloud of dust, that cloud of smoke, that cloud of debris, it lingers and it persists. And like the name suggests, it clouds our vision, it clouds our judgment. That's precisely what confusion is. But when we consider the word confusion itself, it's interesting because if we consider the word consists of two components. And the first component is con, and the second part is fusion, confusion. Now, what's very interesting when we look at these two words, surely the meaning of these two words should be very clear to us. And yet, when you look up the etymology of the word confuse, and let's not, let's make it clear here. Bear with us as we walk you through this exercise because it's important. According to Google, yeah, we can't highlight that. So let's see if we can make that bigger. According to Google or Oxford Languages, confuse comes from confundere, which means to mingle or to be together with. And then we end up with Confucius in Latin and confuse in Old French, and then confound and confused. And in English it says, bring to ruin, etc., etc. And if we look at the word conflict, we get something similar, where according to scholars, according to these gatekeepers of language, the prefix con means together. Now, fligere in Latin means to strike. So to strike together or struck together, conflict. That makes more sense in one sense. But the problem with this etymology, with this interpretation, and this insistence that the prefix con means together is the word confusion actually means this would be a redundancy, because to fuse together, fusion, is to bring together. And if con also means together, then why would you put confuse together? Now, according to the etymology, there's a logical natural progression that we would arrive here using that prefix con. So we use con a lot: conflate, conflict, confuse, contrary. Aha, contrary. In English, con is the antithesis of pro. We have pro and con. What I think what happened with, as they were doing the etymology of words and languages, there's another prefix called co. Now, this absolutely means together. Commingle, cooperate, coincidence. Right? Co-opt, cooperation. This absolutely means together. Why would there be two prefixes in Latin that mean the same thing spelled differently? And why would they come down? And then why would con mean things like contrary, right? There is something fundamentally amiss in the modern etymology in English with the alleged and established doctrinal origins of these words, because confusion is contrarian, meaning to oppose. Pro being positive or to support. And confusion, if fusion means to arrive at or to synthesize, to create, to form, now interestingly enough, then we have the word conform. And that version of con suggests to be with form. So there's this fundamental confusion about the prefix con, where it sometimes means with or to support, but it sometimes means it's contrarian, it's the opposite. It's to oppose. And it is with this strange conflation, again, to conflate. To conflate means to confuse. To confuse something with something else. So does that mean that you are pro or against? It's confusing. But confusion is like chaos. It's like a cloud. It's like you can't put your finger on it. You can't fuse, or you can't bring into form. You cannot determine an answer. You're in a state of confusion. You're lost. Conflict to us leads to confusion, because this to us, this fusion, means the same as union. To be fused as one with. This is the Sanskrit yug and the Latin religare, meaning to fuse together or to bind together as one. When we are confused, when they create confusion through conflict, our union, our ability to achieve yug and religare, which are the root words of yoga and religion, they are negated. They are opposed. We are in a state of confusion, not oneness, not union with our higher self. When we know things, when we are conscious, when we are aware, and when we receive insight and intuition, we know. Confusion to us, forget about the Latin etymology and everything else. What it means in present day and what it means practically speaking is precisely this. And so conflict, as we described, Conflict is that incendiary spark, that explosion out of which bellows this whole cloud of confusion. Conflict leads to confusion. And when we are in a state of confusion, we are confused. We are not connected. We are not one with our higher self. We are separated. Conflict between individuals or between groups, okay, may appear on the surface to be about separating them. But that's the external, literal, physical manifestation of the separation which is taking place inside. The confusion and the conflict. In the Latin, confligere, according to that, it's you're striking together, which is ironic that striking together, you would think that would lead to fusion, but it doesn't. It leads to confusion, which is the opposite of fusion. So you take two people and you strike them together, you put them against each other in conflict, and they end up very confused. This is, in essence, what we're talking about when you hear the phrase divide and conquer. Every conflict, the striking together, the opposition, the what appears to be dividing and conquering out there in the world, all such conflict leads to the confusion within the individuals who are locked in the conflict. And who is divided and conquered? Everybody. Everybody is divided and conquered from their self. Nobody can win in a conflict if everyone ends up confused. If what you end up with is chaos and everybody is scrambling to identify with this side or that side, it's not merely a question of dividing nation against nation or race against race or religion against religion, and then some secret cabal secretly plays both sides and controls everything by getting people to fight amongst themselves. That's what the conspiracy theorists and what most people in general think of when they think of divide and conquer. But we have to see beyond the surface. We have to see beyond the events that are taking place in the world. And we have to see deep within ourselves, within our own psychology, and recognize what is actually taking place. And what is taking place is we are being divided and conquered. Our lower self, our mortal self, is being drawn from and separated from our higher self, our innermost being. Our consciousness is becoming confused, dazed and confused, alarmed, shocked, overwhelmed by these assaults of images and words and images and propaganda and words of anger and hatred, maybe directed at us or at other groups, and we are alarmed and shocked of what's happening on the world stage, and we are sucked into it, we are drawn into it, identified, and we become attached with the immediate outcomes of the chaos which is taking place as a result of that incendiary spark, as a result of that conflict which is taking place. And as we are made to identify with it, and we become perhaps overly sympathetic to one side or the other side, and we lose sight of the bigger picture and ourselves, we are divided and conquered. And this is what all conflict is for. This is why the Black Lodge loves conflict and loves creating confusion. Because as we pointed out, we are in the Kali Yuga. And Kali Yuga is the age. It's the age of confusion. We're living in the age of confusion. So we look to the events of the past 24 hours in the Middle East, and we see an escalation of a conflict which has been, in modern terms, it has been taking place for, 70 years? Over 70 years, 100 years, really. But that's really just the latest chapter in a conflict which is thousands of years old, and older still beyond that. That conflict has now, we have some finality has been expressed on at least one side of that conflict about this is the end of this conflict. That as a result of the unprecedented attack, that now this conflict will be brought to a head. And there is a real potential for this conflict for the cloud of confusion that's bellowing out of this conflict to spread not only throughout the Middle East, but around the world. And anywhere there is confusion, anywhere there is doubt, and anywhere there is fear, and that cloud of confusion contains within it the potential to spark more conflict which resembles the originating spark. There's a number of different analogies or allegories that one can use to understand what is potentially taking place right now. And one is the pebble that starts the avalanche, that starts the rock slide. It can begin with a single pebble, which precipitates a chain of events, a chain reaction that leads to a catastrophic rock slide and avalanche. It's possible that we experience that first pebble or that first boulder being shifted and dislodged and rolling down the mountainside. It's possible we experienced that in the last 24 hours. It certainly feels that way to people in that part of the world, and it may feel that way to people all over the world who identify with either side of that conflict. If that is the case, if indeed what began moving and shifting does accelerate and precipitate a wider cloud of confusion, which spreads again through the region and beyond the borders of the Middle East to encapsulate other countries around the world, then we could all be facing a cloud of confusion that this humanity has never faced before, ever. Other humanities prior to ours faced such clouds of confusion and crises in their own Kali Yuga. But this humanity, on a global scale, will have never faced the type of confusion that could potentially be unfolding as we speak. Because if this incident really does precipitate a broader, wider conflict, and it draws individuals into it and draws nations and nation states into it, then everyone who gets drawn into it, who gets sucked into it, into that cloud of uncertainty, of that confusion, all of them will be being separated from their innermost being, from their higher self. They will be confused. In that context, we may be witnessing the beginning of the War of Armageddon. That war prophesied not only in the book of Revelations, but by many prophets. The war to not just end all wars, but the war to end this humanity, or the war that will mark the beginning of the end of humanity. We cannot speak to this with certainty in absolute terms, but there is, again, we reiterate, there is a kind of finality about the response to the assault, which suggests that there are elements who wish to bring this conflict to a head. And if they do so, and if in their bid to bring this conflict to an end, they do something rash as setting off a nuclear device, then we will see an acceleration, an escalation, and a collapse into a downward spiral of international cooperation and civility will just go out the window. And we will then be witnessing something that, again, this humanity has never witnessed. And we will enter in a whole new age of confusion like we have never known. Because there are individuals, if you've been keeping track of the events that have been taking place over the last few years, hundreds and thousands of individuals from the Middle East have been migrating to the West. Not just in Europe, but also to North America, and indeed Australia, to the developed world, to predominantly Christian nations. If, in the course of events, one particular side decides to declare a holy war, then if that is declared, then it will be the sworn duty of every individual who is identified with that side to take up arms against the so-called infidel, the non-believers. And over the past few years, hundreds of thousands and millions of individuals who would likely identify with and side with and would be bound by their religion, by their faith, to take up arms against the infidel. Not all, but many of them would answer that call. And that could see all four corners of the world suddenly plunged into conflict. And just imagine the confusion which would bellow out in the developed world, where, in the bright and sunny suburbs of Toronto, for example, where no one has ever experienced open conflict of this nature ever, except for maybe during the War of 1812. Just imagine if all of the many migrants from all over the parts of the world who are affiliated with the religion of Islam, imagine if they suddenly were to take up arms in support of a fatwa, in support of a jihad. Or in the suburbs of Texas, or in the suburbs of Chicago, or pick any, or London, or Paris, or the countrysides of any European nation that have been flooded. Well, actually, mostly they've been flooded to the urban centers, but even in Sweden and Northern Europe that have seen hundreds of thousands of individuals from the Middle East been migrated there, almost in a forced migration. Just imagine the confusion which all of the Western nations would suddenly face. And put yourself in the midst of all of that. Can you visualize and put yourself in the midst of that cloud of confusion? How are you going to react? Are we going to allow ourselves to become confused and lose what connection we have to our higher self? Are we going to become sucked into our fear or anger, some desire for vengeance, some desire for control, a desire to turn to violence as our first and only answer to the cloud of confusion that's rolling in like a dust storm, like a sandstorm in the Sahara? And we can see it like a wall of sand just advancing upon us. We cannot underestimate the power of the primal survival instinct, the power of fear, the desire to control our destiny as physical, mortal beings. the primal animal survival instinct. We cannot underestimate how powerful an instinct that is. Even if we consider ourselves to be a very easy, down to earth, not anxious person, we don't suffer from anxiety, we're not a worry wart. We, generally speaking, it's all, everything's water off a duck's back, are pretty easygoing. We think we've got our fear in check. We're not afraid of anything. We're not afraid at all. Now just meditate and visualize gangs of militant freedom fighters or holy warriors riding around your neighborhood, firing AK-47s into the air. Or worse, firing AK-47s into your living room. We feel it's fairly safe to say, no matter how much you think you have your fear under control, there are going to be deep-seated pockets of fear that you don't know about, rushing right to the surface. And you will experience a fear that you've never felt before in your life. If you've never had anyone shooting at you, you don't know how you're going to react. You don't. You will know how you will react to being shot at when you are being shot at. If, that is, you survive being shot at long enough to have a reaction. And that's just the hard truth. But remember, as we've often talked about, when we talk about the transformation of impressions, and we talk about being on the path, it's not about avoiding emotions. It's not about repressing emotions. We are permitted to feel fear. We are going to feel fear. It is inevitable. The question is, what will be our response? Will we catch our reaction in time? And will we be able to transmute that reaction and turn it into a measured response? And perhaps the only response that we will have available to us, the only reasonable pragmatic response, perhaps will be to pick up a weapon and defend ourselves. That may be the only valid response we have available to us. We won't know until we're in that situation for sure. And we cannot rule it out. And we cannot be naive. And we cannot believe that, oh, we will just be like Gandhi and we'll just take a path of nonviolent passive aggression and walk out and greet our assailants with open arms and embrace them. And like so many New Age light workers, erroneously believe that our positive energy and our positive vibes are going to envelop them and engulf them, and they will be transformed. And in a magical moment of rainbows and unicorns and bellowing trumpets from choirs of angels, that they will put down they lay down their weapons, and they will see the light, and they will come over and they will embrace us as brothers and sisters. And they will say, "Praise Allah, we have seen the light." If you think that's what you're going to do, congratulations, you will be another body in another mass grave. If you think that's what your response is going to be, and you think that's what the outcome is going to be from your response, you'll be another body bag. If you make it into a body bag, like I say, it's most likely you'll end up in a mass grave, because if the conflict which could potentially that we're describing unfolds and rolls out, there will be no medals awarded. There will be no ceremonies. There will be no coffins returning with American flags on them. None of that stuff. The War of Armageddon, if we are witnessing its tepid minute nuclear origin, if that's what we are witnessing right now, the War of Armageddon will be a kind of savage and brutal. It really will be like a global guerrilla warfare. And the powers that be will want to take advantage of the tremendous confusion that this will cause. Because remember, just imagine, just look around you in your own life or in society in general here in the West. Can you imagine how any of the millennials or Gen Z would react? These entitled youngsters who are generally speaking useless at everything, how they're going to survive, how they're going to react to suddenly being thrown into the middle of a cultural or religious holy war playing out in their streets, where all their life they have known nothing but comfort and security, and everything's been handed to them on a silver platter. And these are the generations that demanded the creation of safe spaces on college campuses because language is violence. These people can't even handle being criticized without calling it violence. How do you think they're going to handle actual real violence, life-threatening violence? Just imagine the confusion. Look at all these young people who are so weak in terms of dealing with the difficulties of life. Imagine if they're suddenly thrown into a worldwide conflict of cultural and religious significance. And just imagine the confusion. And then consider that for 22 years, governments in the West have been enacting into law and building out infrastructure around said laws, which give authorities unprecedented power over the civilian population. We are, of course, referring to those laws passed in the wake of 9/11 and the rise of institutions such as the Department of Homeland Security in the United States, and similar legislations and similar institutions which have take many different forms in Europe and elsewhere, but all follow the same general modus operandi and the same general philosophy. Certainly, it is expressed most strongly both legislatively and practically in the United States, where if you are dubbed an illegal combatant or an enemy of the state, you are by definition no longer a citizen. And therefore, you lose all rights as a citizen, including the right of legal representation, the right to a trial, and the right to the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. These fundamental rights that all citizens of the United States enjoy, even if they are accused of a crime, they are meant to and supposed to be protected by these various articles under the Constitution. The right to legal representation, the right to a fair trial of your peers, and the presumption of innocence until proven guilty. These are fundamental to the legal process for citizens of the United States. But If you are deemed and labeled an enemy of the state, all those rights are foregone. You have carte blanche indicated that as an enemy of the state, you have no interest in being a citizen, and therefore you have no interest in any of the protections under the citizenry. That's the quasi-legal philosophical rationale for being able to take enemy combatants and carry them off into Federal Emergency Management Association or Federal Emergency Management Agency facilities. Let's not be so crass as to call them camps, because that may be exactly what they are. But again, we're trying to be a little bit convoluted in our language and how we're phrasing things, so that if there is some kind of AI device scanning this at some future date, that it'll be maybe tripped up a little bit or confused a little bit. It won't be able to clearly pick out what we're talking about here. So these facilities that will be, lovingly decorated with very prickly wire fences, and you'll be shuttled off into one of these places where you will think, perhaps, to keep your hope alive and keep yourself alive, you will be awaiting some sort of trial or tribunal or something which may never come. And you may be there in that emergency facility, surrounded by lovely electrified fences, or very prickly fences, and watched 24 hours a day. You may be held indefinitely in one of these wonderful emergency response resorts. Why? Well, here north of the 49th parallel, we have a federal leader, again, who's enacted some laws and put onto the books. Very, very strict legalese related to content and online content in particular. And no doubt buried in the legalese of that law will be statements related to hate speech and language which incites violence and language which incites not just criminal behavior, but incites individuals to acts of terrorism. If you recall, a number of years ago, and we have to be careful, especially with speaking about language related to the if you recall, a number of years ago, there was a convoy of truckers in Canada, and they were labeled all manner of things by the government, to the point where their peaceful protests were even called acts of terrorism. And they were called enemies of the state, and you name it. They were branded and labeled everything under the sun. And recently, the leader of the federal government, our prime minister, when we had a 1 million parent march across the country in support of children and in the support of parents' rights in the education and the raising of their children, our prime minister labeled the participants in that peaceful protest as hate mongers and individuals who were proponents of hate speech. Because, protecting your right as a parent to raise your child with values that you deem to be in accordance with your faith, with your traditions, right? Expressing your constitutional right to raise your child the way you deem appropriate, that's hate speech. That apparently is incendiary, and it's it's a very small leap. That's not even a leap. It's a very small step, just a little nudge over the line to then say, well, if you're speaking hate speech, well, then you are instigating, you are inciting others to act contrary to the interests of the government, what the government has decreed, and therefore your hate speech is inciting people to become enemies of the state, and therefore your hate speech is an act of violence against the state that makes you an enemy of the state, and bye-bye, off you go to one of our lovely emergency management resorts where you think you're awaiting trial or tribunal, but you'll be waiting a long, 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 long time because you've foregone all of your rights as a citizen. The moment that we branded you as an enemy of the state, you are no longer a citizen, and you're no longer protected by the Constitution, because the Constitution is only there to protect citizens of the state, not enemies of the state. All this, you see, will be grounds for a great deal of confusion. And where confusion exists, frustration is not far away. Let us take our understanding of these words and understand the relationship between confusion and conflict and their reciprocal nature. Because we know from Master Yoda in Star Wars that fear leads to anger. And as you know from the many times we've discussed it, fear is the desire to control and to control outcomes. Confusion is precisely being in a state of not knowing. And if we tend to fear what we do not know, and if fear leads to anger, this is how confusion, all of this adds up. And confusion leads to frustration. And frustration means the interruption of a desire for a particular outcome or for desire to a particular process. So someone who is sexually frustrated, well, we use that terminology because they want to live out their sexual desires or sexual fantasies. They want to enact, they literally want the outcome of their lust. But when that is opposed and prevented, the obstacles come in the face of that, well, they become sexually frustrated. Their desire for the outcomes of lust have been interrupted. And out of that frustration can come a great deal of anger and violence. And that in turn feeds, if out of the frustration and anger comes violence, and chaos, destruction, and all these other wonderful disruptive and destructive outcomes, well, that is just sauce for the goose, as it were, and just feeds back into fear and the desire to control outcomes threatened by all of this, and the cloud of confusion just grows to a whole different level. But keep in mind that at every step along the way, what is being confused first and foremost are individuals who are being separated from themselves. They're not just being separated from one another and divided and conquered. No, no, no. Remember, the war for the souls of humanity is within. The Black Lodge doesn't care who wins these conflicts. You know why? Because the moment that we enter into these conflicts, the Black Lodge wins, because it's separating, it's dividing and conquering each and every one of us as individuals, which is their goal. This is what they want. The Battle of Armageddon is not out there in the world. The Battle of Armageddon is within the battleground of the hearts and minds of each and every last man, woman, and child on the planet. And the challenge, our challenge, yours and mine, is to remember that and to maintain our connection, to remain fused, because in that fusion with our higher self, with our true self, we won't fall into, we may feel fear, but we won't identify with it. We will recognize it for what it is, and we will respond accordingly to whatever danger, to whatever circumstance we are in. If we remain connected to our higher self, if we remain fused, and we remain in control of ourselves, of our own reactions, of our own responses. That doesn't mean stifling and suppressing our anger, our frustration, and so on. It doesn't mean that. And it also doesn't mean dogmatically avoiding violence. Again, if the only response we have is to physically and violently defend ourselves or defend our family, then that is what we must do. But to know whether or not that is what we should do, if that is what we are meant to do, if that is the best course of action for us, that knowledge comes from knowing ourselves and remaining connected to ourselves, not allowing ourselves to be overwhelmed and our judgment clouded by the bellowing clouds of confusion that are pouring out from all the incendiary acts of conflict that may be erupting all around us. We don't want to be drawn into, we don't want to get sucked into that trap. Because that's what the Battle of Armageddon is. It's a trap. Just like the Kuf was. The Kuf was a referendum on fear. The Battle of Armageddon will take that to the next level. Fear and anger and envy and hatred and identification with things like religion or race, nationalism, nationality, all these things. All these external identifiers, they will all be used as vehicles, as tools to divide and conquer us from ourself. We have to be prepared for that. And what if we're wrong? Oh, you know what? We've got a bunch of comments. We haven't had the comment window open. So we haven't been monitoring the comments because the comment window wasn't open. Okay, so here we go. Benjamin says, wow, sorry to hear that the new rules circumscribe freedom of speech. This is going to become a thing, not just in Canada, but it's going to become a thing elsewhere around the world, and it's going to become a thing in the United States again. All of this, and it's all designed to frustrate us. Because if you can frustrate individuals, frustration that leads to confusion and separation, that anger, right? You're gaslighting people, you're goading them into taking a stance, into then threatening action against the state. If they can get you to do that, if they can get you to speak out against the state or speak out and say something which can be judged as inciting violence, inciting terrorism, then instantly you become an enemy of the state and boom, you're taken away. No trial, no representation, no lawyer, right? No presumption of innocence. Because remember, that's the other thing that has been taking place in the West in the past few years, thanks to the Me Too movement, is that in the kangaroo court of public opinion, women who accused men of sexual impropriety, those men were considered guilty the moment that the woman accused them. So for several years now, the general public has been psychologically starting to become acclimatized to judging people and assuming and creating a presumption of guilt. And I mean, if the TV says they're guilty, how could they not be? The media says they're guilty. You might chuckle at that kind of notion, but the reality is the vast majority, they believe what CNN tells them or what Fox News tells them, and that's the way it is. And here in this country, as we said, when the truckers were doing their protest during the COOF, our national media, right, the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, was outright calling them terrorists and enemies of the state and everything under the sun. Everything under the sun. It's state-funded media. How is that any different from any other propaganda state-run anything in any other part of the world? There's no objectivity there. There's no interest in informing having an informed public. No, it's just tell them what we want them to hear. Tell them what we want them to believe. It's perhaps we naively, as Canadians, because we're so polite and we're so nice and we're so kind and we're so, we don't want to ruffle any feathers, we don't want to rock the boat. Perhaps we naively never imagined that such a thing could happen in our country, and that certainly not someone as charming as our prime minister could ever, bring about such draconian legislation. But our prime minister is just a puppet anyway, so he does what he's told, and we don't have to get into the details of who and what tells him to do what he does, because really it doesn't matter, because all of these groups and all of these individuals who we might cite by name, they're all just useful idiots, and they're all just puppets of the Black Lodge. Because nobody really cares. I mean, they might care, but in the end of the day, what really matters is what happens in the hearts and minds of each individual. That's where the Battle of Armageddon is fought, and that's where the battle for the souls of humanity is fought. It's not out there, it's in here. And we must always remember that. We must always remain cognizant of that. We must never be so eager to allow ourselves to get wrapped up in anger or frustration or confusion or chaos, or take sides, or identify this side versus that side, or what have you, because if we do, we are losing the war, and we are losing the war for our own soul. We must remember that everything that's happening is just part and parcel. It just comes with the territory of the Kali Yuga, the death of humanity. And the question is, are we strong enough to be able to endure and observe all of that, and maintain our composure and maintain our peace? We're not saying it's easy to do. And we're not saying you have to force a kind of stoicism upon yourself where you don't feel anything. The answer is not to try to force yourself to become numb and indifferent. But we have to learn and practice the transformation of impressions. There's a kind of healthy indifference to our own emotional states where we recognize, oh, there's fear. Yeah, there's anger. Okay, breathe, get my composure. Yes, I feel angry. I feel frustrated. Yes, this is pissing me off. I see that. I see that I'm being pissed off. I can see myself getting angry. Okay, I'm feeling the anger. All right. Now, what is it that's making me angry? Why am I so angry? What is it inside of me that's making me angry? Forget about what's outside of you. What's outside of you is just the trigger. What is inside of you reacting to what's outside of you? And can you see its rationale? How is it justifying itself? That fear, that confusion, that frustration, that anger. Transform that. Transform yourself. Feel what you need to feel. What comes up, comes up. Recognize it, see it, experience it. Don't suppress it. Don't push it away. Don't try to avoid it. You have to face it. We have to face the adversary. The adversary is not out there. The adversary is in here. And the Kali Yuga will continually throw up, and that's a pun intended, will continually throw up circumstance after circumstance after circumstance, which is going to trigger the adversary inside of us and cause it to rise up like the demon out of the darkness, like in Fellowship of the Ring, when the Balrog is awoken from his sleep. And all the other lesser demons, right? All the other orcs and the goblins, they all scatter in fear because the Balrog is coming. And watch out. We have to be aware of that. We have to know that within us, we have these Balrogs, we have these demons. And in order for them to come to the surface where we can face them and fight them, as Gandalf does, we have to see them. They have to be awoken from their slumber. And so the Kali Yuga is going to continually throw stuff at us over and over and over again. And we're going to be bombarded with all of this conflict and all of this confusion. And yeah, we might not know what's coming around the corner next. But do we know ourselves? If we know ourselves, we can face whatever comes around the corner. And we can face it with equanimity. And we can face it with that inner strength calling upon our innermost and our Divine Mother to guide us and to provide us with the response that is appropriate, that is not only going to get us through the situation, but is going to do so without accruing more karma, without harming ourselves or others unnecessarily. Kathy said hello with a heart. Hello, Kathy. Glad that you could join us today. And Benjamin said nearly an hour ago that because English is a mixture of Greek and invented aggregations. Yeah, English is a real hodgepodge. And English, you sometimes you look at the etymology of these words and you say, you know what, there's something just doesn't feel right about these etymologies. And remember, these etymologies were controlled by the intellectual elite, and the intellectual elite are the egos. And how many times have we shown you guys, time after time after time, the conflation and the confusion of language, and how language is altered, where words end up meaning their exact opposite. And this is just one of those situations where English is that perfect hodgepodge of different languages, where it's one of the most difficult languages in the world to learn, for the reason that there are exceptions to every rule, and multiple different exceptions to every rule. So it's very, very difficult, but it's very easy to create confusion using the English language. Benjamin Ochoa says, yeah, and there's a bunch of Arabian people in my town. Yes, Benjamin, if we're correct, you are in Africa. Are you not? If we're right in remembering that, then yes, there's many members of the Nation of Islam all over the world, including Africa, and Southeast Asia. And so if that's, they really are trying to goad the wider Islamic community into declaring a holy war, a jihad. If they can do that, then they can incite a global conflict, a guerrilla warfare on a global scale. It could precipitate. It could become that. And Benjamin says, we can only hope those Middle Eastern people adopt their new country's ideology. It's sketchy. It's hard to know. Well, look, it's hard to know exactly here in the West. It's a lot of these immigrants have been handed. Here in Canada, there's a shortage of 5.6 million housing units. So in other words, we have over 5 million homeless people in Canada. And these are Canadian homeless people, because the over 5 million immigrants that have been brought in over the past few years, they have all been given housing by the government. So all the affordable housing, none of it's like over the last few years, it's all been going to immigrants who have been brought to this country, who have also been being paid a stipend. They've been receiving something like $3,000 a month plus free housing. That's So we're only a country of like 40, 45 million people. So that's something like, that's 5 million homeless people. That's like, what, over 10% of Canadians are homeless. But the immigrants who've been bringing in have been getting us pretty sweet deals. So are they going to rise up against the nation if they're told to? A lot of those people fled the Middle East, and they fled conflict, and they fled oppression, and they fled a lot of things. And now they have it pretty good here in Canada. Are they really going to bite the hand that feeds them? This could go many ways. But we can say that many disaffectuated young men who have had everything handed to them over the years, and they might be Canadians, and they have had everything handed to them over the years, but they don't have very many good prospects, and they've seen a lot of this woke stuff taking over in Canada in the last half decade, especially. They might decide to rise up. It's hard to say really how it's going to shake out. We have that expression, the devil's in the details. And certainly what's unfolding, again, we have this cloud that's we had this incendiary spark of conflict, and now the cloud is beginning to emerge from the explosion, right? And that as that cloud gets bigger and that cloud gets thicker and more, it's going to cloud our ability to see exactly how events are going to unfold. Because everybody still has free will. Everybody still has the ability to choose the path that they wish to walk. And nothing is set in stone. Nothing is foretold precisely. That's why many of us who have insights or foresights about the future, it's presented to us in a very kind of factual way, saying, okay, this is going to happen. But then beyond that, we can't see what's going to happen because there's this inflection point that depends on how people are going to respond, how people are going to react to what just happened. And so you don't really know what's going to happen beyond that because the future is not set that way. It can't be set that way. Only those events can unfold, which have already unfolded in the astral plane, and only those events can unfold, which we know objectively can and will and must happen. But we cannot predict how free agents are going to react. We cannot know that until their responses or until their reactions have already manifested. And until then, it's like people talk about the singularity or the point beyond an inflection point. So things come to a head, they come to a point of decision, and beyond that, you can't see what the future is because you don't know how that is going to turn out, that inflection point. You really don't know if it's going to go this way or that way. It could go either way. So you don't know what the outcome is. And which is fine because anyone who's really on the path knows that we can't be attached to outcome, and we can't be identified with and worried about or trying to control outcomes, because that is the definition of fear, right? Cassandra Graham she said the word observer, and she said to be the observer of our emotions. And that's the beginning, the first step. We have to observe ourselves, observe our emotions, but to transform them, to transform impressions, goes one step beyond observing the emotions. To extract from the presence of the emotion something positive, something beneficial, something productive. And so to digest the emotion consciously is just one step beyond mere observance. So you can practice this. For example, if you go for a walk in the woods or out in nature, in the meadow, or, the fall is coming. So perhaps where you live, you have trees that'll be changing colors, and there'll be beautiful colors to look at, and so on. So go out in nature and take a walk, a Zen walk in nature, and try to put yourself into a meditative state and walk and observe things that you observe and things that you really see, and notice the difference between when you're on a walk in nature and you're looking at this and you're looking at that and you're seeing those things. You are observing nature. You are observing the trees, the flowers, the path, the rocks, the water, the waterfall, the whatever, the sky, the birds. You're observing all these things. But then every now and then something will catch your eye and draw your attention. And you might pause, you might stop your walk, you might really focus in on a sound, or on a bird, or on a flower, or on a tree, or whatever it is that drew your attention. And you really start to focus on it and you really take it in. That's the difference between merely observing and transforming, seeing, and penetrating with your consciousness the moment, and seeing all the details of what you're observing. So now you're not just observing, like you might have observed 10 different birds on your walk, but now this woodpecker grabs your attention. And you stop and you're watching this woodpecker as he's putting his holes in a tree, and now you see all the details in the feathers, in the plumage, in the graphics around his eye and under his eye and on his face and on his back, and the little chips of wood or bark that are flying off the tree as he's doing his thing. Like all of this detail emerges from that experience. So that's what we mean by really digesting what you observe. And Cassandra says true. Observe, then take the observation and formulate from that the positive steps from that to take next, even the decision to continue to wait. So there's that, right? I mean, that's the practical, pragmatic approach to how we respond to the emotion. So there's really a three-step process. There's observation, there's transformation, and then there's response. Even if the response is do nothing, or as you point out, or just to wait, just to do nothing. But you know how hard it is to do nothing if you're sitting there fuming with anger, or you're shaking with fear, or you're clenched up in stress or envy, or right. So to wait and persist and endure and indulge in emotion is not ideal. It's number one, it's very difficult. Number two, it's very draining. There's no faster way to drain your energy than to sit there trying to repress an emotion. So by digesting the emotion, we take the anger and we transform it. And it's not to say that we can transform anger into joy, right? Just to get us back to equilibrium. Just digest the anger. Why am I so angry? And really observe. And if you're all clenched up, you can observe all your clenched muscles and breathe into them, and you can release, you can feel yourself releasing the tension in those muscles. And elsewhere in the body, like, in your neck and so on. So observing the three brains and transforming and recognizing why I'm so angry. It's because I wanted XYZ. Well, what wanted XYZ? Oh, it was my lust that wanted XYZ, or my greed, or my envy. I really wanted that person to get their just desserts. Right? I had an expectation. Okay. So an expectation. There was an expectation there. So, okay. So now I see how I was the cause of my anger because reality didn't meet my expectation. Well, then what's that? That's called the desire to control outcomes. So the desire to be in control, to be a control freak, everything else, so that's fear. Now you know, okay, I was angry, but really what I really was afraid. As you can quickly go through this process consciously, moment to moment, and dissipate that negative energy. You can breathe it out, you can breathe it down through the soles of your feet into the ground, and in the transformation of that, then you can sit there and wait indefinitely because you're no longer fighting it. You're not fighting anything, right? Transformation of impressions is not about fighting. It's judo. It's psychological judo. It's taking the kinetic energy, the force of your attacker, of your assailant, of the adversary, and turning it and using it as momentum as you deflect the assault. And you maintain your position of your defensive position as a result. You're not fighting. You're not, it's more subtle than that. And Cassandra says, indeed. Benjamin says, no, I'm in California, Central Valley Indian, which is Middle Eastern. I thought one of our Benjamins was in Africa. Well, that was our mistake. So, but hey, listen, Benjamin, you're in California, so you may as well be in another continent for how strange that state is compared to every other state in the United States. And Central Valley Indian, which is Middle Eastern. So there you go. All right. So where were we with? We said I think we said maybe we were wrong. Cassandra says to speak harshly to someone, one is angry. Okay, to speak harshly to someone one is angry with would be like throwing fists. If you speak from anger, for sure, yeah. Sometimes we have to speak harshly to people, or harshly maybe is not the right word, firmly. And that doesn't necessarily come from anger, place of anger. We really must know ourselves well to know the difference between severity and anger, because our ego will often try to conflate and confuse the two. Again, we come back to this word confusion, and again, it's relationship to conflict, because oftentimes we will face an opposition, someone behaving in a way that they shouldn't behave, and we must confront them. And confrontation, again, there's another con word, confrontation. This may as well be a good place for us to address this. We've been talking about these con words, right? Confuse, conflict, conquer, actually, divide and conquer. That's another con word. But often we have to we must confront. Confront, again, suggest, if you want to say with or together, to front two fronts together. So a face off. would be another way to describe confront. Two people facing one another, mano a mano. It's a confrontation. And sometimes we must confront a situation or an individual. And as you know, we must always, if we don't want to be an ego, then the answer is to be in love, come from a place of love. But love is severity and it's mercy. So if in the course of confrontation we must enter into severity, then we might have to, speak. We might have to be very firm. We might have to be direct. We might have to speak from a place of strength and confidence, which, make no mistake, people will call arrogance. Mercy, hopefully we don't, mercy is where things like kindness and gentleness, and where we get, compassion. Whereas in severity, often we experience the opposite of compassion. We feel we come from a place of passion. We speak passionately in the name of truth, in the name of justice, which, by the way, is the other word for severity, right? The other word for severity is justice. Now, by justice, we don't mean like social justice. We mean doing what is right. Doing what is right. And that's why when we act in a confrontation, if we act with severity, we will often be accused of being self-righteous and arrogant and so many things, because the ego is going to try to want to gaslight us and goad us into falling off the wagon, falling into ego, and falling out of severity, out of mere confrontation, into conflict. And the ego is going to want to confuse us being firm and direct and passionate in the name of what is right, and in the name of truth. They're going to want to conflate that and confuse that and get us to believe that we're being angry, or get us to actually become angry and frustrated. Cassandra follows up and she says, to be honest with care and to care with honesty. Without this balance, there is ego. Well, we always care. If we didn't care, we wouldn't bother. We wouldn't bother with it. So caring is sort of rooted in, if you didn't care, you wouldn't bother, right? So, but yeah, honesty is truth. And since ego is falsehood, and ego is a different kind of caring, ego is self-care. So there's a difference. When we confront with love, we are acting out of the other individual's interest. when we confront someone and we fall into ego, we fall into conflict, we are acting out of self-interest. And that's where righteousness becomes self-righteousness. Yeah, so Cassandra says here, compassion in the passion as to not be operating in anger-driven passion. Well, anger is a twisting and anger is a degeneration of passion and fear and all these things. So it's really the way to contextualize this and understand this is understanding the difference between um, you said the word care. If you're predominantly caring about yourself, you're an ego. If you're predominantly caring about about the other, you're in love. You're in compassion. You're in passion. You're in all these things. Then you're in either severity or mercy. It doesn't matter. You have to apply what the other person needs. This is where the expression spare the rod, spoil the child comes into play. That expression doesn't exist because it's encouraging you to beat your children. The expression exists because if you do not apply severity in the upbringing of your child, where it is required, where your child requires severity, if you're too squeamish or too sentimental to apply severity and you only apply mercy and compassion, you are spoiling the child. The child will not learn what they need to learn and they will not survive in this world because they won't know how to survive, because they will never have faced the severity of life, because they were never given that opportunity from their parents. And make no mistake, sparing the rod is a very clever, very subtle ego that is convincing you that you're being merciful and you're being compassionate towards the other person because you're not coming down hard on them. But really and truly, sparing the rod is squarely here. It's self-interest. You're sparing the rod because you don't want to be seen as a troublemaker, and you don't want to be seen as hard-hearted or cold-hearted or harsh or tough or strict. You don't want to be judged as the enemy by this person that you love, that person that you want. You're worried about what other people think of you. You're worried about your other people's perception of you. So your what's the word? We're drawing a blank. But anyway, you're concerned about yourself in that instance when you're sparing the rod. But your ego will convince you that you're a good person because you're being kind and compassionate to the other person. And that's where the expression comes to kill a man with kindness, or to kill a child with kindness. This is very subtle, and for years we were confronted by this, and we were faced with a great deal of fear related to being direct, firm, passionate, and speaking the truth. That because again, we were afraid that we were falling into, that we were becoming a tyrant, that we were afraid of being a tyrant, because that's the other thing, right? Because you're worried, if you're worried about yourself, and this is exactly, Cassandra says, like people pleasers are doing it for the self. Exactly. They're people pleasers because they want to be seen and they want to think of themselves as pleasing people. So that's a good way to think about it. But another way to think about it is they're afraid of being seen or seeing themselves as a tyrant, as being bossy, right? As being cruel, right? Of lacking compassion, dispassionate. So there's all these different ways that an individual can avoid 50% of what love is, right? 50%. That's one half of what it means to love. Imagine leaving half of love on the cutting room floor because of what? Because of fear, because of pride. Fear because of pride, right? Because of one's reputation. This is the word that we were looking for. And because of envy. Because you look at what this stereotypical you watch a sitcom and you see what Hollywood says is the perfect parent, or you turn on the internet and you look at what the internet, the new age, says is the prototypical spiritual guru, the mild-mannered, soft-spoken, always polite and always being positive and always uplifting and always da 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 da, right? It's bullshit. It's nonsense. You think that's what it means to be spiritual? To always be stroking people and being positive and always filling them with positive affirmations? That's leaving 50% of what love is on the table. And in fact, if what the person needs is a good talking to, and what they need to do is hear the hard truth, then filling them with loving, comforting affirmations is you're just stroking their ego. You're just pandering to them. You're doing exactly the opposite of what they need. Then you're not. Forget about leaving 50% of love on the table. You're leaving 100% of love on the table, because if in any given confrontation, in any given circumstance, what someone needs is on this side of the equation, then this is 100%. Because in that moment, that is 100% what love is. Love is what the other individual needs from us. What someone needs from us and what we have within our power to give them. There is no room for confusion in applying love to a confrontation. There's no room for confusion and separation and worrying about what we care about, what matters to us, and what we're worried about. All this crap. All that matters is that we love the other in how we can or how we are able. In other words, to be. To be what? To be love. And in any given moment, love is severity, right? And or mercy. Because it can be both. Because, of course, there's compassion and passion. And there is gentleness and kindness always as we are firm and direct. We don't have to be cruel. We don't have to be dispassionate. We don't have to be cold-hearted about anything. But if we are firm and direct and passionate, if we are acting from love, all of that mercy and kindness and gentleness and compassion will be there in the required amount, so long as we are connected, so long as we are fused with our innermost source of love. And Cassandra agrees, and she says that the innermost guides guides which to do, severity or mercy. And up, Kathy earlier said we need to confront with mercy to set boundaries sometimes. This when we have the opportunity to do so, then we do confront, and we, as you say, lay down boundaries. We say, this is what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And we do that precisely so that we inform others. Again, what are the boundaries? What are the limits? What do we mean by crossing the line? And if we're, especially when we're dealing with children, but also in relationships and other things, we want to be sure, though, when we do so, that the boundaries that we're setting down are for the benefit, as much for the benefit of the other individual as they are for our benefit. Because while we recognize we must have self-respect, and we cannot allow ourselves to become pushovers and people pleasers, etc., because if we are too nice all the time, people will walk all over us. If we are setting these boundaries for our safety and our comfort, right, our security, and for various different, in other words, for our benefit, then it's kind of, as Cassandra suggests here, I set boundaries to connect and love them, to help us not disconnect. Well, the problem with that's fine, and that makes a lot of sense to the rational mind. But, and she says, disconnecting may be the outcome, but it is not the intention. It's never the intention, right? People, as Kathy says, you set the boundaries with an intention that if the other person respects the boundaries you set, that's going to bring you closer together. What we said before still applies. This is hard. This is hard to accept. Oops. This is a bitter pill to swallow. And you can tell yourself that, well, I'm only able to love others, right? So to love, to care for another, to love for another is to be love, to love them how we can love them. And what you're saying is, well, in order for me to love them, and typically when we talk about boundaries, we're talking about like romantic love. I can love them if, X, Y, and Z boundaries are respected, right? Here's the problem with that. The problem with that is that these are conditions. That's a condition. Those are conditions. Now, again, we have another con word. And whether you believe that that means with or in opposition or opposed, doesn't matter. The word dition means state. So what you're saying is, I can love you if you are with the state, or if you cross that state, if you are opposed to that state. So in other words, it's a condition. You're either with me or you're against me. You're either within the boundaries or you're outside of them. It doesn't matter how you interpret the word con here. You end up at the same place. Right? To be or not to be. Now, having said that, we have to be practical. We have to be practical. This is not a suggestion that you owe everybody your unfettered allegiance and respect and loyalty and devotion, no matter what they do. But there is a subtle difference between being with someone and trusting and respecting them, that we present a wide open field of possibility, and that they will reciprocate of their own accord, and they will know what is and is not appropriate. You know how when you get a job and they present you with a whole series of things of what is and is not considered appropriate on your job, like appropriate attire, appropriate speech, appropriate things to say, appropriate behaviors, appropriate, right? And you get presented this from the HR department, this whole laundry list of things, essentially treating you like a child, like you have no common sense, like you don't know how to carry yourself in a professional environment. It's sort of like, you know, that's the kind of document that a corporation drafts. Why? Because they want to limit their risk. They want to limit their liability. Because corporations are all about money and they're all about risk management. So they have their legal departments and their HR departments draft these policy and procedures manuals. And they say you are expected to adhere to these policies and procedures. These are the boundaries, if you will. If you're with someone and you have this wide open field, and you are attempting to establish within that field that you share, that shared field of unconditional love, and someone does something or crosses a boundary which was never stated this is a boundary, but they cross that boundary, they will know it and you will know it. Then you want to engage with them and find out what they did and why they did it, and if they really comprehend that it was a boundary that they crossed or not, even if it was an unspoken, unwritten boundary. If they claim ignorance and they claim, well, I didn't know that I didn't know that bothered you. You say, well, it bothers me now. How do you feel about that? And if they say, you know what, I didn't realize that was going to bother you so much, I won't do it again. This is a way of sort of navigating these things as they come up. But there's no particular need necessarily to lay down the law and say, yeah, I'll love you and everything, but these are my boundaries and you better stick inside of them. Otherwise, it's not going to work. That's not love. That's you worried about yourself. That's self-care. That's that's self-interest. And if you say to yourself and you rationalize to yourself, no, it's really for the other person because I want them to have the benefit of getting to be with me. That's a cyclical argument of self-interest. It's really hard for women to hear this. Men too, but men worry about this less. It's really hard for women to worry about this because women have been subject of so many men who have violated boundaries. But rest assured that all the men knew that what they were doing when they did it. No self-respecting individual has any sort of common sense or worldliness whatsoever believes that they can do XYZ and that it won't bother you, that he's not crossing a boundary by doing XYZ. But if you try to preemptively prevent him from doing it by confronting him with it before he's even shown any sign of stepping over that boundary, now all you've done is patronized him. Now all you've done is treated him as a child, not as an equal, not as a partner. All you've done is said to him ahead of time, saying, I don't trust you. I don't trust you to know what's right and wrong. So I'm going to treat you like your mother and tell you ahead of time, now don't be doing this. Don't be doing XYZ. Otherwise, just something to consider. Something to consider. It's hard to hear and it's hard to swallow. And let's face it, we're not naive. We're not stupid. We know that many men out there, they need to be told XYZ because many men are dumb. But somehow we feel confident that anybody listening to this live stream isn't going to be attracting stupid, ignorant people into their life and isn't going to be trying to start romantic relationships with ignoramuses and with walking zombies and with self-interested, egotistical people who, by the way, even if you do lay down the law, even if you do set the boundaries, they're going to go ahead and break those boundaries anyway. If they were going to do it before, they're going to do it after. And you stating the boundaries isn't going to make a lick of difference. It really isn't. If that's their nature, in which case you don't want to be with that person anyway. But it's funny that we mention this because we're just having this conversation with someone, how we learned we don't use any online dating sites, certainly not Tinder or anything like that. We haven't for years. We used to be on eHarmony years and years. decades ago. Decades ago, we were on eHarmony. But back then, it was still kind of civil and enjoyable, and you could meet interesting people and so on. And one of the persons we met, we went on a first date with. And at the end of the date, I said to her, I said, all throughout the entire evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that this woman sitting across from me, I couldn't shake the feeling that she would be perfect for my friend Dan. And at the end of the date, I said, "Hey, listen, Lisa, it's there's nothing really happening here, is there? There's no connection here." And she's like, "Oh boy," she goes, "I think you're a really great guy and everything, but I'm so glad you said that because I've been feeling that the whole night. Like we're not clicking." I said, "You know what? 100% we're on the same page, but I have a very good friend that I would love to introduce you to him because I just can't shake the feeling that you guys would really hit it off. And would it be okay if I gave him your number?" And she said, "You know what? You seem like a really decent person, and I know that I figure any friend of yours is sure. What could it hurt, right?" They've been married for over 10 years now, and they have 3 kids. So that's my little online dating story. Um, but nowadays, we've heard through the grapevine that nowadays, online dating apps, women have this expression that they use on online dating apps. And in their profiles, they tell the prospective guys looking at their profile, you got to be a 666. And they say, you know what? If you're not a 666, don't even bother. Don't even bother. You won't get a response. And it begs the question, well, what the hell are they talking about? Well, they're laying out boundaries. You know what the boundaries that they're laying out? They want you to be okay, so let's do it this way. They want you to be 6 feet tall. If you're not 6 feet uh, tall or more, if you don't have 6 figures, okay, meaning salary, and 6 inches. And we'll let you use your imagination what they're referring to there. That's what women are putting into their bios on dating sites nowadays, and they're telling men, if you're not a 666, don't bother. You're not going to get a response. Now, this is an extreme example. This is an extreme, okay, boundary. These are extreme boundaries, but they are boundaries. And it also reveals just how many women they have these expectations, because boundaries, another word for boundaries, are expectations. And for a man trying to find a mate, a regular guy trying to find a mate, who's 5'8", making $85,000 a year. This is like, he's essentially being told, you don't bother. You're done. You're going to be single the rest of your life. So again, this might be an extreme example, but no matter how you slice it, you're not, this has nothing to do with love. This has absolutely nothing to do with love. It doesn't matter that it's on a dating site or whatever. This is a preemptive, egotistical passive aggressive statement of uh, of desire. This is women being a control freak. This is women looking towards a relationship, a potential mate, as they look for a handbag or an article of clothing, right? You know, you have the bust size, the waist size, and the hip size. And I need these are the measurements that I'm looking for in a dress. Well, these are the measurements they're looking for in a man. If you don't measure up, forget it. Now, we don't do any online dating anymore. We haven't for decades. It doesn't directly affect us, but it just reveals how far down the downward spiral things have gone since we did online dating 2 decades ago. How far things have degenerated. Because nobody would ever put anything like this. Or the ones that did had mentioned, maybe they mentioned salary, or maybe they mentioned, a lot of them did mention that they at least wanted a guy that was taller than them. They didn't want a guy that was shorter than them. So they would say, if you're shorter than me, I'm probably not interested. You know, and that's, you know, if someone's not attracted to someone who's shorter than them, that's understandable, right? So a woman who's 5'6", she'd like guys who are 5'7" and taller. Okay, fair enough. So but there's nobody alive who realistically and honestly is only attracted if a man is wealthy, 6 feet tall, and well endowed. That's not love. That's closing. That's not a wide open field of opportunity and creating a space of unconditional love and hoping that the right person is going to walk into that space and reciprocate that unconditional love. That's not what this is. This is narrowing the field down into a very particular materialistic, egotistical framework, and expecting to find true love in that very narrow definition. So, anyway, we don't want to dwell on this anymore. This question of boundaries and the relationship of boundaries to love. But Kathy says she does laugh at that. And Cassandra says that some impacts are catastrophic. Benjamin says it's hard to be an asshole while all you practice is doing good. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. Meaning, I believe what Benjamin means by this is many women are attracted to assholes. And what he's saying, it's hard to be an asshole while you practice when all you practice is doing good. Now, here's something that we learned the hard way, Benjamin. And he follows up and he says, extreme is good for me. I'm more of an introvert. We learned this the hard way, is that, and we were actually told this by an ex-girlfriend. She said, you can't be so nice all the time. She said, you can't be so nice to us all the time. She says, don't you know that if you're nice to us all the time, women become real bitches? And we meditated long and hard on that one. And suddenly what came into our realization was exactly what, you know, when we remember a lot of what we share with you, it comes from experience. It's experiential knowledge. So we came to this realization about love being severity and mercy. And Benjamin, it's not assholes they want. It's just that women want to be loved 100%, fully cared for in all the ways that means, in every way that means. The problem is that so many guys are either nice guys or they're assholes. And assholes too have their moments of being nice guys. They're not always assholes all the time. So there's moments when assholes are nice guys, but then the rest of the time they're assholes. But guess what? Women are so craving the firmness, the directness, the passion, a strong man, one that they can respect, that they would rather go out with the asshole than they would with the nice guy. Why? Because the nice guy is too nice. They lose all respect for the nice guy because he's leaving 50% of love on the table. He's not being assertive. He's not being direct. He's not being firm. He's not telling her, no, you're not going to get that. No, I'm not going to do this. No, you can't have that. No, forget it. Stop acting like a child. Look, do I need to spank you? Like sometimes women just need a good spanking. And women know that. Women know sometimes they can be irrational and crazy and all sorts of things, and they want and need their man to tell them and show them with a firm hand, say, hey, listen, settle down, take it easy, relax. But a nice guy is unwilling to do that because a nice guy is too afraid. He's afraid of how she's going to react. He's afraid of getting into a fight with her. He's afraid of her, storming off in a huff because she didn't get her way. He wants to be seen as the nice guy. He doesn't want to be seen as a tyrant. He doesn't want, and nice guys, and I'm including myself in this because I was this nice guy for a long time. All growing up, I would watch beautiful girls in high school and virgins and everything else go out with these assholes and lose their virginity in the back seat of a car or whatever, right? And be turned into mattresses by going to university and getting drunk and, and just like being totally abused and taken advantage of by jocks and, like the football team and all the other assholes that I thought. And I always saw myself as being above them, right? I had a superiority complex. I was smart. I was intellectual. I was proper. I was charming. I was well spoken. I was well read. I could dance. I could treat women like ladies, like they were meant to be treated. I was a nice guy. And boy, did I take that. Was I identified and attached that moniker of being a nice guy and treat women with respect and dignity and all this kind of stuff. All the ways that I saw these assholes not giving these women. So I thought I'm going to be their antitheses, and I was. But it never worked out for me because the expression nice guys finish last exists for a reason, because a woman wants a strong man. And a nice guy is weak. We are weak. Because if we're not willing to be assertive and strong and stand up and tell her when she needs to be told, and stand up for what's right for both of us. Instinctively, on a primal level, a woman chooses a mate based on his strength. A woman chooses a husband based on his strength. A woman chooses the father of her children based on strength. Is he a strong man? Can I build a household on that foundation stone, on that cornerstone of that masculinity? Has he earned my respect? And in the absence of genuine strength, in the absence of, genuine loving severity, women will, unfortunately, they'll go out with the asshole because she'd rather go out with a strong asshole than she would a weak, nice guy. And women become bitches to nice guys, and nice guys finish last because women lose all respect for a man who isn't strong. Because she knows in her times of weakness, she has to be able to lean on him, and he needs to be able to be solid as a rock, to be able to carry her in her times of weakness and her times of emotionality, in whatever. She needs him to be strong, and for not only for her, but for her kids, if she's looking for someone to spend the rest of her life with and start a family with. And that's why nice guys finish last, because nice guys are too nice. They're wet noodles, right? And when it comes to romantic love, right, there's a reason why, we don't want to get necessarily too into detail, but you can use your imagination. The difference between a wet noodle and a strong, upstanding, firm man, and use your imagination, right? And your association between the male member and romantic relationships, and ultimately what is going to work for a woman and what isn't going to work for a woman when we talk about manhood and masculinity. So we'll let okay, we have to back up here and say, Cassandra says, I've dated in my lifetime all variables of all three mentioned. None of those areas will speak to the quality of the relationship. She says, rich and poor, tall and short, different anatomical presentation, and none of that speaks to the potential of love to be there or not. We wholeheartedly agree, because we've had a wide variety of romantic partners throughout the years as well. Kathy Holton says exactly, and she made this comment in reference to the nice guys finish last, and the women want strong men, not nice men. Cassandra says, some people are so nice, they harm you in their niceness. Kindness is both soft and firm. Benjamin says, it is everything that I'm not, but I still need to do my homework and balance my rational mind out. All I can say, Benjamin, is when we finally woke up to this aspect, that when we finally recognized the psychological song that we were singing ourselves, because this is really ego, to be identified with and attached to the nice guy monitor and believe ourselves, I'm a nice guy, I'm a nice guy, I'm a real catch, I'll treat her like she's a queen, and we have this romantic ideas of treating women like they should be treated. Nobody has ever treated them the way we're going to treat them. And it's like we have this romanticized, egotistical view of ourselves as being like the ultimate boyfriend, right? And that this nice guy, whatever. It's when I finally awoke to the self-sabotaging, self-delusional attitude that this was, and I embraced the fullness of what love is, and that means tough love when it needs to be. The conflicts that and some of the other problems that we had in relationships just evaporated. They just vanished. Now, did all problems vanish? No, we stepped up to a whole different level of relationship, and we had a whole different series of challenges to then face and deal with, because we were attracting very different partners into our life, and so we upgraded to a whole different level of challenges of relationships, which we talk about in our article on lovers and chi eaters. But the point is that, so it didn't solve all of our problems, But what it did do was put us on the level of equality with our partners. And even when they were angry with us over something, they would never lose respect for us. Even if they were pissed off at us, fuming, angry, whatever, they still didn't lose, they still respected us. And this is really, really important in a relationship, because you will fight. You will get into arguments. There will be disagreements. But you want those disagreements and those arguments, because you will trigger one another. Because you will have, if you have a lot of chemistry, then you will be chemistry in a positive way and you'll be chemistry in a negative way. The sexual energy will want to flow. If it's not sparks in the bedroom, it's a raging grease fire in the kitchen. It's just the way relationships go. But if you have that fullness of love, of severity and mercy, then your partner will not lose respect for you. Even when there's a grease fire in the kitchen, she will recognize you not only trying to put the grease fire out, but she will recognize that you are acting out of her interest, or the interest of the relationship, not out of your self-interest. And that's you're not going to be, and it's not going to be that you are trying to win her over and trying to pander to her by being a nice guy. And remember too, that between a man and a woman, you want to talk about conflict. And what's very confusing in relationships is that, and we go into detail on this in our article on lovers and cheat eaters. Conflict between lovers is the sexual energy. It's just lust playing itself out through another ego. But it's still lust. It's still fornication. Because in the act of fighting and arguing, that conflict, you're expending a great deal of sexual energy. And why so many couples, after they have a big rip-roaring argument or fight, a lot of them, what do? You go into the bedroom and you have makeup sex. And many couples will swear that the best sex they have is the sex they have after an argument, after they fight. That makeup sex is the best kind of sex. Why? Because fighting is foreplay. Because you're exciting the sexual energy. It's the sexual energy, it's the creative force that's being stimulated. And the chemistry that you have with your partner in the conflict is bringing up that energy, and it's like it's churning the energy, and it's like firing, it's stoking the fires, right? It's firing up the ovens. So naturally, when you spend all that time and energy and effort firing up the ovens, naturally, the body, the primal urges, everything wants you to put something in the oven. Right? It's, then bake something, for God's sake. You fired up the oven to put something in the oven. And so that's what happens. That's why makeup sex, couples swear by it. And that's why a lot of couples are fiery couples. And like many, like, for example, in fiery cultures, South American and other Latin countries, or countries along the border, where you have like fiery cultures, Italian and other, Spanish and these cultures that are known, less so the Northern Europe stuff, but more in the southern regions where it's hot. It's the temperature's hot, it's sweltering, and you have these fiery cultures, like the tango and like the dancing, for example, of these cultures. Traditionally, they're hot, they're spicy, their food is spicy. They're fiery cultures, and their personalities and their traditions, their cultures are fiery, mercurial cultures, and they're passionate, right? I guess is the other word for it. So this can all be very confusing to someone who is trying to be a nice guy, or a woman who's trying to be demure, or controlling her emotions or whatever, and then trying to have a relationship with someone who has a fiery personality, or an introvert trying to be with an extrovert, or vice versa, or two introverts, you know so on, right? um where are we here? We got to go back. Okay. Yeah, Cassandra says both niceness and cruelty can harm you. Kindness never will. If what's called for is severity and all you get is kindness, then you're being harmed. If what you need is severity, but all you're getting is kindness, you're being harmed. That's where the expression comes, to kill someone with kindness. So, it's severity does not mean cruelty. If you interpret severity as cruelty, then you're actually hamstringing your own divine mother, because life is said to be cruel. But people who say that life is cruel, you have to understand that your divine mother teaches our divine mother teaches us very, very harsh lessons. But our divine mother is not cruel. This is hard. This is hard to recognize. The ultimate expression of unconditional love is the expression of the divine mother for us. You know that life is not always kind to you. And you know that some of the most important lessons you've learned in life were very harsh, hard lessons you had to learn. Your divine mother orchestrated those lessons. If you want to really appreciate and comprehend the fullness of love, then meditate on the hard lessons of your life and meditate on your divine mother. And if you ever project into the astral plane, ask to see your divine mother. It's one of the first things we should do, is ask to see our divine mother and remember her, right? Because those hard lessons, that knowledge, that experience that was hard fought, that came from us having to go through hell in order to learn what we learned, it broke your divine mother's heart to do that. But she did it. Why? Because that's what we needed. That's what you needed. Not because she was wanted to be cruel. So we have to really reorient ourselves. And if we can't reorient ourselves by thinking about romantic love because of our experiences and so on and so forth with bad boyfriends and so on, and all you need to do is rekindle and become conscious of your connection to and your relationship with your own divine mother. And that is the best way to comprehend what unconditional love is. Cassandra says the wisdoms is not to choose cruel assholes, but strong, firm kindness. Yeah, so agreed. You want strength, not cruelty. Benjamin says, but when most women are zombies, is the problem from what I see in depth, of course. That's why I'm more passive in that sense. Leaves me to ponder, am I wrong? But I'm just more observant. Instead, I'm just more observant. Look, Benjamin, and he says, yeah, I understand the ultimate boyfriend idea. You're right. Okay. You may be just attracting the wrong women. But you're also in California. So, I mean, California is a strange place from what we can gather. California seems to be at once a state where where so many people believe that they're awake and that they're spiritually advanced, and yet California is also the epicenter of Hollywood and mass pop culture. Like Los Angeles. Los Angeles is one of the most asleep places in the world, let alone the United States. But it's filled with people who think they're awake. So I don't know, maybe move out of the state. or maybe work on the women who you're attracting, that you not attract zombies. um we're not sure what else we can say to that. And he says, yeah, I understand the ultimate boyfriend idea. Kathy says respect is very important, and she says, I love tango. And Benjamin says, thank you, sorry for getting a bit personal. No, it's, you don't have to apologize. That's what we're here for. And yes, Kathy, tango is our favorite dance. Tango is our favorite dance because tango is the tension, and it's really an expression of the intensity that we bring to our own life, but also the tension that we live with as individuals, particularly, and the just the passion that comes through that particular dance, because we're very intense and we're very passionate that way, and that's the most intense and passionate dance. We have another close friend who does ballroom dancing, and his favorite is the rumba. He says the rumba can be very intense and so on and so forth, but for us it's always been the tango. Cassandra says, I lived in San Diego, and I always said my Latin partners were as passionate in their joys as they were in their anger, and so too the bedroom. She says, I had a Latin partner once who we argued down every grocery aisle, and we asked how long we had, and we were asked how long we had been married, even though we were dating. Basically, he was a passionate guy. We enjoyed our bickering. Uh, so that's interesting. Uh, we have our business partner in Peapod Life. We would go out in public, and people would always assume that we were married, just because of our bickering and arguing. We would fight like an old married couple. We truly, and it was always in fun. It was always in. We were never angry, and we were never. It was just our way. And sure enough, she never liked to consider this because it was just really weird for her to consider this. But like, we know for a fact that we were married in a previous life. We've been brother and sister. We've been father and son, father and daughter, and we've been husband and wife. We've also been, yeah. And in this life, we weren't blood related brother and sister, but she is in many ways like the older sister I never had. And that's the relationship between, that's our soul family. That lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, very often we end up working with the same souls over and over and over again in one or more intimate ways. And sometimes they're a parent, sometimes we're their parent. Sometimes they're our spouse, sometimes they're a brother or sister, a close cousin, a best friend, a business partner in this particular case. And but always within our circle, we will have this soul family. So it's interesting when we meet someone, and we meet them with them, and not always, but sometimes we'll meet with them and we'll have this relationship with them where it's like almost from the day we meet, it's like we're so comfortable with them, and we just so know that, like when you talk about boundaries, like we just both know where the boundaries are, and we just go up to those boundaries and we push them and push them and push them, but we never really cross them. But we're always playing in those boundaries. We're always playing in that very wide field, that wide open space of love, which is really has a lot of possibilities in there. But since we're always on the edges where it's most interesting and most fun and most dynamic, where the tension is highest, that's where people show up out of the blue, and they'll say, how long have you guys been married? And we'll look at each other and say, we're not married. But yeah, there's a good chance we were married. And that's why we bicker and argue like an old married couple, because we have that intuitive connection, that bond, that soul bond. And we know we've been here, we've done this 1,000 times, and we know where the limits of this space is. And it's so broad and it's so wide, this field of love that we share, this unconditional love, that we can, we can tightrope walk around the edges quite comfortably and safely, knowing that even if we slip and we cross that boundary, we will be quickly forgiven and all is forgotten, right? And we just have that when we find individuals in our life that we can be that comfortable with and that open with and that honest with. This is where conflict and confusion evaporates, right? And when we are with them, we are closest to ourselves. And these are these special people in our lives that we know ourselves better when we are together with them than we are with other strangers who are, again, they're strangers, they're strange, we're not familiar with them, we don't know them. And then there's these people in our lives that we know them like we know ourselves. They're like putting on an old familiar sneaker that we've had for 10 years. You know that sneaker that you have down in the basement somewhere that you slip it on and it's like, it's the most comfortable shoe you have in your possession because it's 10 years old. It's a well-worn sneaker. There are people in our life like that, and they're part of our soul family. And yeah, it's very hard to fall into conflict with them. Or if we do, it's a kind of bickering, an old married couple type bickering that's like, it's just our way together. It's just like, because we're passionate, we care about each other, and we care about the things that we're working on together. And we care so much, we care enough, and we're passionate enough about it that we'll come to loggerheads, that we confront one another. It's never really a conflict, but it is a confrontation, because we got to work out the edges, we got to work out the details, and there's going to be some friction in the working out of those details. But that's what friction does, right? That's what smooths over the edges. You need friction. You need to take sandpaper to wood to sand it down so it's nice and smooth and you get all the splinters out. It's the same thing when you're working with a sculpture. First, you take the hammer and chisel and you carve out the rough hewn shape of what you're sculpting, and then you start getting the sandpaper out and the chisels, and you start slowly chiseling and sanding down the marble or whatever it is you're working with to get those beautiful, soft, flowing lines into things. So there's friction there, and that requires confrontation, but not conflict, right? Not confusion. That's the difference. Because confrontation with care, and we talked about this earlier, someone mentioned it in the chat. Confrontation with care, firmness but kindness, right? There's a place for both. But you always care. You always care about the other person, what's best for the other person, and what's best for the collective. Yeah, you see, so Cassandra's like, bickering is more just being authentic with each other and not hiding an opinion to avoid conflict. So, but it's that comfort level, right? It's the trust that you can be who you are and you're unafraid to be who you are. So there's a trust there. There's a space in there. You can be who you are, and there's going to be a confrontation, right? But you're not avoiding conflict, but you know that you can have a confrontation without it devolving into a conflict. And we're using those words specifically to for a reason, because conflict denotes a fight. Confrontation could just mean a discussion, or, as you say, bickering. Because some couples, they can't discuss. They can only bicker. They can only argue. They can only fight, right? Our parents were like that, right? Most of the time they were just bickering, right? But there's a playfulness to it, right? There's a dynamicness to it. And Kathy Holton is agreeing here. And she says that kind of space with someone is gold, right? And Cassandra says, perfectly said. We have this experience. We know that what Kathy is saying here is important. It is magical. It is gold, because there's a playfulness to bickering. There's a playfulness. Yes, it's important, but neither person is taking themselves all that seriously. What we're taking seriously is each other and whatever it is that we're bickering about. So if we're having people over for dinner, right? We're having people over for dinner and we're making a turkey. Okay, it was Thanksgiving here in Canada yesterday. We had a big Thanksgiving do, right? And we're making dinner, and there's a bunch of people coming over, and we're making a turkey, and she wants to do it this way, and I want to do it that way. And it's like, no, you got to rub the spices under the skin of the turkey. And she says, no, we don't have time for that. We got to get the turkey in the oven. Just sprinkle the spices on top. It'll be fine. I said, no, but it's so much better if I'll melt some butter, and I'll put the spices in the melted butter, and I'll just give the turkey a good rub down under the skin, right? And they're like, no, we don't have time for that. We got to get the turkey in the oven, right? So neither person is taking themselves seriously. It's about both of them want to make the best experience for their guests. We want to, we want the turkey to turn out. We want the best turkey. And she's like, the best turkey is going to happen the sooner we get it into the oven. And he's like, no, the best turkey is having, we got to spend some time and take our time and like massage down that turkey and get the spices in there, right? So you get this bickering, you get this confrontation, but it's not, there's nothing personal in it, because it's all about the end. It's all about the focus, which is a shared enterprise. It's a shared goal. We both want what's best in this moment. We want to make the best turkey. It's this ridiculous example, but it's true. And so bickering and arguing in a relationship about the relationship, what's best for the relationship, what's best for the kids, what's best for our future, where confrontation turns into conflict, is when it devolves into all this, right? This is where you get conflict, where each individual is worried about themselves, is worried about what's good for them, and ending up on the short end of the stick. So when you can find someone that they're worried about what's best for you, and you're not worried about, that's not the right word. Your concern is, your focus is what's best for them. Their focus is what's best for you. And together, combined, your focus is what's best for the both of you, the relationship, the family, the enterprise. If you are looking for a partner to share a path with, a life path, a life work with, you need someone who's going to say, when you ask them the question, what's more important to you, your life's work or me? You want someone to say both, because I can't see myself completing one without the other. Right? I can't see myself fulfilling my life's work without you. That's golden. That's when you guys, and whether that life's work is having a family, if someone asks you, what's more important to you, me or the kids? You say, I can't see myself raising these kids without you. You're equally important. The difference is I can never choose my kids over you, because if losing you meant keeping the kids, I don't know how I could love my kids without you. Or I don't know how I could do my life's work without you. So yes, my life's work is very, very, very important. And I don't think I would give it up to just go with you and live on a desert island. So in that sense, my life's work is more important than you. But I don't think I can complete my life's work without you. This is what we're looking for. This bond, this type of thing where yeah, we can bicker and argue, but it's never personal. It's always playful. It's always high energy. It's always because of that, in that creative space, we have that space of unconditional love with these boundaries way pushed out way to the end, but we can tap dance on those boundaries together. We can tango all the way. It's like when you see ballroom dancers, we ballroom dance. I think I've told you this before. When you see ballroom dancers or ice dancers, we used to skate on the ice. It's all about using the whole space, every inch of the ice. So we would skate right up to the edge, right up to the boards, because with these big, long, sweeping lines, and it doesn't matter if you're on the ballroom floor or on the ice, it doesn't matter. You always use the full space of your space of love, because it's the firmament, it's the world to you. That shared space of love you have with someone, that's the world to you. And so you want to exist not only that world, but also to be on the edges of the new frontier, on the edges of discovery, on the edges of to boldly go where you haven't gone before together. Because remember, you've done this journey. If it's a soulmate, especially if it's a twin soul, you've done this journey with them many times in different ways, in different arrangements, different orientations. Anyway, we don't want to keep saying the same thing over and over and over again. Cassandra says, when one partner is focusing on themselves to your detriment, this can push a person into needing to consider themselves. Now, this is true. This is true. This is where self-respect and self-love does come into play, and also what we said earlier about being practical. And remember, we said that being unconditional love is not an invitation for you to put up with anything and everything that the other person does and forgive them no matter what. I mean, this is not what unconditional love means. Sometimes the severity that you have to bring to the table is to cut them off and say, that's it. 3 strikes and you're out. That's it. You're clearly, you know what? We shouldn't be together. It was nice. It was nice when it lasted, but you've crossed a line. You were told you crossed a line. You didn't care. You crossed it again or whatever. No one is expected to endure abuse and all sorts of cruelty and everything else superfluously, just because. And do not ever get it into your head that you owe it to your partner, you owe it to anybody to put up with their bullshit, because you must be an expression of unconditional love. This is the whole severity side of the thing. You have to be prepared to put these people in their place. If they've done something they shouldn't do, you got to put them. And if they don't respect that, this is where the boundaries come in, right? Where you actually start to, okay, you're new, we don't know each other that well, you cross this line, but you know what? There are these, we gotta work out these boundaries. We gotta work these things out. If they're not interested in respecting that, if they're not interested in working out those boundaries together with you, defining what those are, dancing along the edges, knowing how far they can go, and where stepping, crossing over the line, and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, and how are we flexible on these things. And so this is a creative process. This is a negotiation. But if they're not willing to do that negotiation in real time, I don't mean talking it out. I mean actually, like, practically real time, knowing it, feeling it out, and actually experientially negotiating all of those landmines that couples can get into and find themselves trapped in the middle of, if they're not interested in negotiating and tiptoeing their way through that landmine into the clear meadow on the other side, if they're not willing to do that in good faith, then cut your losses and walk away. You have it within your right to do so. And don't expect anybody to change for you. So just bring down the hatchet, cut the cord, let them go. If they learn the error of their ways and they realize the mistake they made, they might come crawling back on their hands and knees begging you to take them back. Then you'll be confronted with another situation, and then you'll have a different decision to make. But there is that old cliche, if you love someone, set them free. If they're meant to be with you, they'll return. But don't ever cling to anything, and certainly don't ever get into your head that unconditional love means you have to put up with nonsense. You don't. You don't. But listen to your heart, follow your gut, follow your intuition. Beware the gremlins and the egos, not just in the mind, but in the heart, because they really do like to sabotage couples, especially couples who are meant to be together. Because soulmates, they have a lot of chemistry, and they mirror each other in many perfect ways, because that's what makes them soulmates. So we attracted them into our life because there's nobody better who we can learn and grow together with. But it's a double-edged sword, because we're going to be triggering each other all the time, and the demons that are going to be coming up to the surface, they're going to be coming up to the surface, and they're going to be trying to sabotage. They're going to be trying to get us to again, have that grease fire in the kitchen go out of control and burn the whole house down. So we have to be aware of that. Have to be conscious of that. Kathy says, I used to teach ballroom dance. Really? We never taught it. But we certainly did dance with a bunch of people who had never danced before. So, Cassandra says, love goes beyond presence. Presence may require limits. When we talk about that space, there will be boundaries to that space. And in a relationship, those boundaries are explored and arrived at through this constant negotiation. And it's not a verbal negotiation. You talking it out might be part of it. But when we talk about boundaries, we're not... It's a very... it's really... It's more like the definition, like the outline, the shape, the nature, the unique character of the relationship, which is unique to every single couple. And that outline, it's like the boundaries or the borders of a nation, right? It's like no two nations in the world look the same. Every country looks different. And their borders, there are all sorts of different factors that come into play as to why the border was drawn here and not there, and why here it's straight and here it's jagged and all that kind of stuff, right? So if you think of this space of love, of unconditional love, it's a space that you're trying to... It's like you and your partner are like establishing a nation. And when you establish a nation, you have to decide where the borders are. Well, you can't just look at a map and say, well, let's draw it here and here and here and this way and that way. And you got to go out there. You got to see what the geography is. So you go and you travel around, you travel around your country. You go for a walk, you go for a hike, you go on a trip together. And in the course of that journey, you discover, there's the topography. Oh, look, there's some, there's the mountains, there's the forest, there's a river, there's a this or that. That's all part of geography and topography, I suppose. But there's all these other factors coming into play, right? And then in that process, you will arrive together as, aha, there's the natural place to put the natural place to put the border. And yeah, you could bump up against those boundaries for sure. But you could also climb up those boundaries and look at the other side and see the precipitous fall on the other side together and go, okay, we don't want to go there, right? You walk right to the edge of the white cliffs of Dover, right? And you look down into the angry Atlantic beneath, and you say, okay, pretty sure this is where a border goes, right? But you discover that, right? You discover it together. And in the discovery of it, it can be humorous. You can be lighthearted. It can be an adventure. And it can be oh boy, we almost went careening off the side of a cliff together. Good, note to self, right? Let's be extra careful when we're tiptoeing across the white cliffs of Dover here, right? This is the difference between establishing boundaries and having a partner who you are comfortable and trust. You can go and discover those boundaries together, and you set those boundaries from your own experience. And it doesn't mean that you have to fall over the cliff to learn that it's a boundary, right? All you need to do is see it and recognize it as such. And you both look over and you look at each other and you nod knowingly. You don't even have to say any words. It's beautiful, it's extraordinary, it's wonderful that we had this experience and everything else. But hey, we both know there's cause for caution here, right? And you go on and you move on with the rest of your journey. You don't dwell on it, and you don't have to make a big deal out of it. When you're with someone, you can just share that moment of silence, that you look at them and you give them that loving nod, and you're like, yeah, and they nod back at you like, yeah, okay, we're on the same page. We know it. We don't have to say anything. We know what we just been through. We know what we just saw. We know what we just experienced, and we know what we just learned from that. And you move on. It's like Scent of a Woman, right? Right, Kathy? If you get tangoed up, you just tango on. Cassandra also says nuanced, untangible sense of respecting each other. Well, there you just put into words exactly what we just described, what we just tried to describe the experience of, right? All right. Surprisingly, or perhaps not surprising, and Kathy says, right, okay, if you get tangoed up, you just tango on. We started out on a very different subject matter, or at least what caused us, and we ended up in a very, very, very different place than we expected to. But because we have no expectations really in that sense, we have no biases towards where we end up. It's interesting because here's where we ended up. Conflict leads to confusion, which separates us from ourselves. And conflict seeks to separate individuals from one another. And in the macrocosm, what we see happening right now in the world, and what that means for the Kali Yuga and possibly Armageddon, people trying to be torn apart. And as they're trying to be torn apart in the macrocosm, on the political stage, and on the cultural stage, on the racial stage, and religious dimensions, the most important thing is they're being torn apart and separated metaphysically from themselves, their higher selves, their true selves, their being. And this is how the Black Lodge divides and conquers us. And from there, we as Cassandra suggests, we've woven together beautifully, although we can take no credit for it. I can take no credit for it anyway, because really it was all in response to you and your comments and your responses and your how the flow of what our friend Wolfgang would call the us conversation, or the speaking to the listening. We just started mapping out and started taking it where it was going, and we let it go where it needed to go, because after all, relationships, right? Bonding, uniting, being one, together as one, the bonds of holy matrimony, right? That's everything. That's one of the reasons why this humanity was separated into the sexes, so that God could know itself better, so that this humanity could know itself better by that by that that incessant longing for union, to be one again, for the fusion. And so by comprehending love and the two aspects of love, severity and mercy, and always caring for the other, and always caring for the shared space, the shared enterprise, the space of love that we are cultivating together, like we were describing, like establishing a nation together, and where the boundaries are and everything else, with the topography and experience and everything else that we were describing, and having faith and trust that the person we are with, they're going to be on the same page. And when they're not, when they don't respect those boundaries, and when they don't do this, well, we know we have to cut ties and we have to go and seek someone else, because there's no point in trying to force the issue and push anything and force anything on anybody. That's not what severity is about, right? We should also be careful about that, and imposing our boundaries on others, and so forth and so on. So anyway, we ended up here starting out talking about Middle East conflict, but really in the microcosm, romantic relationship and true our soul family, and all of this, how it relates to the connection to our true self and the connection to love. This is what really matters, because let's face it, the 144,000, we want to talk about the Kali Yuga. This, right, reduces to 9 Kabbalistically. 9 is Yesod on the tree of life, the 9th sphere. This is the sexual force. So the fact that we ended up talking about relationships and talking about, how modern day dating, women want 666. Yeah, well, to be a 666 in your mind, your heart, and your body is to be an inverted 9. Because what we want to be is a 9, 9, 9. A 9 in the mind, a 9 in the heart, and a 9 in the body. That's one away from a perfect 10. That's an upright 9, an upright human being. Upright. That's upright, we're a 9. If we are inverted, I don't know, can I even draw an inverted pentagram? Yeah, maybe I can. Okay, so to be inverted is to be the inverted pentagram. This is a satanic sign, right? So we don't want to be this. We don't want to be facing down. We want to be facing upright. So we want to be 9s in our 3 brains. So the fact that we started out talking about conflict and confusion, and who is dividing and conquering whom, it is almost natural that we ended up where we ended up, because in microcosm, in our in our lives, this is really, for many of us, what matters most. And in terms of the Kali Yuga, in terms of being part of the 144,000 who are saved, the chosen ones, okay, the chosen, the ones who will be chosen, they're ones who are upright 9s. They are what are part of the 144,000 working in Yesod, in the tree of life. So we're going to scratch out that inverted pentagram, because heaven forbid the the algorithms decide that that is also something that needs to go. So here. Let's see. Azazel says, in my last relationship, I took calculated risks, but man, am I bad at math. You and me both, brother. I'm terrible at math. Cassandra says, the macrocosm is as the microcosm. The ills and healing of the greater universe and society can be seen is one-on-one partnerships as well. Yes. So that's right. As in microcosm, so in macrocosm. And we can see that the same expectations and you know the this 666 that we were talking about here on Tinder and modern dating apps, you can see that playing out in the world in macrocosm as nations make demands on others and so on and have these expectations that because they're only thinking about themselves and everybody seems to be um, concerned with their with what's best for them, and very people seem to be concerned about what's best for others, except for the social justice warriors who feign they do uh, virtue signaling because they too, right? They have nice guy syndrome, right? The social justice warriors, they want to be seen as worried about everybody else, and they want to be seen that they're concerned about justice, but really they're only concerned about themselves, their own egos, and they're only being seen as a certain way, and they're just as bossy and cruel and becoming a tyrant as anybody else that they believe that they're speaking out against tyranny. It's a great irony. And Cassandra Gramps also says, wow, yes, her mind is blown. We believe that was about the 999 and the pentagrams, the inverted and the upright pentagram, but we could be wrong. But anyway, Cassandra's mind was blown there at the end. Anybody have any questions or comments or concerns, or let's open it up to yeah, and she says yes, she agrees with that. Okay, so let's open it up to comments and concerns and questions. You can ask just about anything, or if you have any insights that you have related to what's going on in the Middle East, that's feel free to share that. We think that it's still a little bit too early to tell what, if anything, is going to come out of this. But if Netanyahu lives up to his word, and if he follows through with what he says he's going to do, then this thing has the potential to escalate and spill over, and it could, if it keeps snowballing, if it keeps if it keeps snowballing, then and it triggers a chain reaction. The one thing, if it leads to the Muslim Authority declaring a jihad against the infidel, then we're in for a very 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 serious global conflict. That's our assessment at this time, and certainly if Netanyahu drops a nuke somewhere, if Netanyahu fires a nuke into Iran, for example, we're looking at a very 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 serious escalation, because Russia is allied with not only Iran but Syria, and we could be in for some very very turbulent and destructive times indeed. Cassandra says grease. She says grease fire in the kitchen could burn down the house. Yes, yes, it could. It could indeed. But you will find that, generally speaking, grease fires in the kitchen between couples doesn't burn down the house. Most couples don't let the fires in the kitchen burn out of control like that. Unless they do it for years and years and years and years, and then the house just slowly degrades and falls apart, and that's they grow. They call it's called growing apart and divorcing after 20 years. But we talk about sparks in the bedroom, fires in the kitchen. It's just that the sexual energy with people who have chemistry, the sexual energy is going to flow, and the sexual energy doesn't care if it flows up and atom or down and out, right? So it doesn't care if it's flowing with love and affection or anger and frustration, right? It's just going to flow. It's nature. Energy has to flow. Energy does not want to be stagnant. Just like everything in nature, everything has to keep moving. As Azazel says, I'm a bit late for sharing insights now. We missed quite a bit of the stream due to work. But yeah, the situation overall is not something we should overlook. Azazel is here, of course, is referring to the situation in the Middle East. Azazel, what happened was we began on that topic. That was what prompted today's live stream. And in the course of events, we moved from the macrocosm down to the microcosm, and how everything that's happening in macrocosm and in microcosm, we want to be sure that we're working on fusion with our higher self, and that conflict and confusion is by design exists in the Kali Yuga in order to separate us from our higher self. So for us to become one of the zombies, for us to become one of the walking dead, and a part of this humanity that mechanical nature wants us to be, involved with our egos and ruled by our egos, spilling blood and doing the rest of it in order to fulfill those aspects of the Kali Yuga. But our goal as esotericists, as seekers, as Gnostics, whatever we want to call ourselves, our goal on the path is to maintain our composure and our equanimity and our peace, even in light of all of the conflict and the confusion, to be able to transform those impressions and recognize and confront that within us which wants to react to the confusion and the conflict and cause us the internal confusion, to cause us to the separation from ourselves. We want to be able to confront that within ourselves and transform and eventually comprehend and eliminate the causes of our suffering. So yeah, there's in a nutshell. Cassandra says, but it could lead to making up and a healthier understanding on both sides. We can hope for the better outcome. Perhaps you weren't yet listening at the time. We also mentioned how a grease fire in the kitchen can lead to makeup sex, and many couples swear by makeup sex. We talked about it earlier in the live stream. So, because many couples, they fight like cats and dogs, and for them it's like foreplay, because it's getting the sexual juices flowing. It's getting them aroused. Remember, being angry and yelling and screaming and and punching and hitting and throwing things, and you're aroused. You are aroused. Now, it might be your anger that's aroused. It might be your envy. It might be your fear. Your all kinds of things can be aroused. But you have to understand that arousal, there's only one force that causes arousal. It's the sexual force. It's just whichever egos are utilizing the sexual force determine the emotion and the state of arousal. If you're anger or fear or whatever, it's still the sexual force. So if your sexual energy is being aroused by anger, if that anger can suddenly be displaced by lust, then bingo, the fighting and the shouting turns into into having sex, having makeup sex. And Cassandra says, hoping for a healthier outcome for the Middle East. We can hope and we can pray. Just keep it on the level of hope and pray. Don't take anything into the level of expectation, because in expectation, that's where disappointment and a lot of suffering can come. So remember that this was foretold. Armageddon was foretold, and it's only really a matter of time. We're not saying that it's starting now, but this might be, again, the pebble that starts the rock slide. As Azel says, Sweden is not precisely neutral in either of these wars, since we supply weapons to the, quote, good guys. Well, the United States is not at all neutral. The United States is patently on the side of one side of the, quote, good guys, which is a laughable concept to begin with. Kathy says, thank you. I learned quite a bit about you today. Oh, quite a bit about us. Enjoyed it. Oh, all right. That may be a good thing. That may be a bad thing. We don't know. So everyone, look for the new tell-all book authored by Kathy Holton, coming next month. You'll see us on Insider Edition or in the tabloids or whatever. So does anybody else have any questions or comments before we call it a day? We have our something in our throat again. So yes. So you would have learned quite a lot about us today, because we got into that territory of relationships, and as we said, we invoked our own experience, because I mean, that's where knowledge comes from. Genuine knowledge comes from experience and insight. And as we shared with you, we were gifted with certain insight, and after meditation and contemplation and then experience, certain things emerged, and so on and so forth. And we also shared some of our foibles and shortcomings in years past, because remember, we've got, it's 50 years now under our belt in this lifetime of being horrendously stupid and making all sorts of silly mistakes, and learning the hard way a lot of the things that we know and that we share. So yeah, today was inevitably going to reveal certain things, and some of you shared as well, personal things and experiences and so on, that are, again, rather, there are a few things more personal than romantic relationships and experiences of that nature. The only thing that's really more personal is our spiritual relationship, the relationship with our true self and our divine mother, and beyond, the being of our being, the logos, which is sort of the most precious and the most sacred and the most personal, the most intimate. And why we brought it all back and mentioned in the end the 144,000, and how that relates to 9 Yasod on the tree of life and all of that, because it is that's the intimate relationships that we have with one another, the romantic intimate relationship. Again, as above, so below. It's the closest we can it's the closest we can achieve to experiencing a proxy on the material plane to the intimacy that we can experience in the supernal worlds. So the physical intimacy that we have with our partner and the practice of white tantra is the analog, and the marriage, the union of man and woman, is the proxy, is the allegorical, symbolic, physical analog. That's where that word comes from, right? Analog, real, but analogous. And that's why that word is in analogous ultimate methodology, because it is through what Master Samael called the perfect matrimony that we can synthesize, transform, and transmute in the process of sexual alchemy. We can transmute the lead of ego into the gold of the human soul, the solar bodies, which are the vehicles, the vessels that allow us to achieve that union, that fusion with our innermost being, with our higher self. So it is natural, really, that we arrived where we arrived to, and then it was woven together, as Cassandra suggested, because fusion is what we seek, union with divinity. And if if confusion is the antithesis of that, and conflict breeds confusion, as we described at the beginning, where conflict is the incendiary spark and confusion is the cloud, the dust cloud, the cloud of debris and smoke that bellows and lingers for hours after the fact. Like, remember the dust clouds after 9/11, all that asbestos and all that, like, powdered concrete, right? Because of all of the incendiary devices which went off that day, that pulverized the concrete of those buildings and created those enormous dust clouds. Or you think about an erupting volcano, right? And how a volcano erupts on Iceland, and you have the incendiary explosion, but then you have the ash that spreads out over the entire surface of the planet and causes haze in cities all over the world, right? So it's that haze, it's that cloudy confusion. If it's conflict which leads to that cloudy confusion, now you know why the War of Armageddon, it's almost like an essential aspect of the Kali Yuga. It's almost essential that it takes place, because it's one of the most powerful weapons that the Black Lodge has to create that cloud of confusion, because it's in that cloud of confusion, opposition, to oppose the fusion between lower self and higher self. That is the Antichrist, that is the anti-religion, the anti-yoga of the Black Lodge. The determinism against our free will, the physical against the metaphysical, the material against the immaterial, etc., etc., etc. The great conflict, the great battlefield for the souls of humanity, and the great war for the soul of humanity, Armageddon, takes place within. And everything out there is just there to create the confusion inside of our own psyche. So just remember that. And we wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to say to all of you that you may as well begin preparing psychologically, emotionally, for, if it's not now, for what will come. Some version of it will come, because the Black Lodge will not give up this particular tool in their arsenal. Okay. Azazel says that he doesn't have any more questions, so he says, have a good night. We ask one more time, and we'll give you guys 30 seconds or a minute to type your questions or your hellos or goodbyes or whatever you'd like to say, and then we will We will call it a day, call it a night, wherever you are in the world. If you happen to be in Canada, then happy Thanksgiving. And it's a strange thing to be in Canada, to be honest with you, and celebrating Thanksgiving on the same day that this conflict erupted in the Middle East. It was a strange thing yesterday. And, everyone showed great restraint. No one mentioned it. No one talked about it over dinner. We had 13 people over for Thanksgiving. And in a way, at times it was almost like you could sense that some people had it on their mind, but the rest of the time we just, you know what? Out of sight, out of mind. We're not going to ruin Thanksgiving. We're not going to turn this into a big political debate, right? It was just family, and everybody showed great restraint. We just kept it civil and loyal and just focused on the food. And oh my God, was there food. There was so much food. We can't even begin to describe how much food there was. We're going to be eating leftovers well into next week, after which we will be getting a month-long fast, I think. So anyway, Azazel says next week I won't be at work during the stream. So we'll be happy to have you on, Azazel, next week. And Cassandra says that I'm marinating in this discussion today. Very important topics, but I will say happy Thanksgiving to all my Canadian neighbors to the north. Thank you, Cassandra. And it was a pleasure having you here and having you participate in the chat and the discussion, as always. All right, then. To all of you, we want to thank you once again for being with us today. And we hope that you have a wonderful week. We hope and pray that things don't escalate, but we also aren't getting our hopes up, nor are we having any expectations either way. So we hope that you got lots out of today's live stream. And as always, we hope to see you again next week. And in the meantime, take care, be at peace, and inferential peace. Goodbye, everyone.